Okay. We wanted to talk with all of you about invasive swine this morning because we're in the midst of sort of a transitional phase for how the province manages these critters. And we felt that the watershed districts may want to be involved in this next phase because your mandate is so compatible with the province's objectives. So as I understand it, the mandate for the watershed districts is to work with partners and help to conserve Manitoba's soil, water, habitat, and climate. And invasive swine pose a threat to water, soil, and habitat in the province. So it seemed like a good idea to sort of reach out to you folks and provide you with some information and explore opportunities of how the watershed district might want to be involved in management efforts going forward. So I'm not sure how familiar with all of you are, how familiar you are with invasive swine. So I wanted to just start with a few of the basics. Invasive swine go by a number of different names. You can see them listed here on the screen. Everything from wild boar, wild pig, feral swine, feral hog. They go by a number of different names, but basically if it oinks and it's outside of a fence, we now consider that to be invasive swine. How they live on the landscape. Typically males are solitary, whereas females and their young live in a family group known as a sounder. And males typically disperse from those family groups by about 16 months of age. A little bit about their history. Wild boar is the ancestor of domestic pigs. So they're the same species, but different subspecies. So we have Sus scrofa scrofa, which would be considered the typical Eurasian wild boar, whereas Sus scrofa domesticus is more the domestic pig. And wild boar were brought to Manitoba in the 1980s as part of a livestock diversification initiative. And then they were interbred with domestic pigs to make them more prolific. And this was very successful, and they are still able to interbreed successfully. Unfortunately, when the farmed wild boar market didn't expand as was expected, many of these animals were released or they escaped from captivity and became feral, free-roaming, invasive. The last licensed farm for wild boar in Manitoba was in 2009. And the swine that are currently free roaming on the landscape were either formerly captive livestock or their descendants. So the Eurasian wild boar typically has the appearance of the pig on the screen here with the coat of brown to black hairs with white or tan tips that appear kind of grizzled. But their appearance can vary quite widely because of that interbreeding between wild boar and domestic pigs. So their appearance can vary quite a bit. They are members of the Suidae or pig family. As I mentioned, they're very prolific. They can reproduce quite quickly. They're fertile by about 8 months of age. They produce litters of anywhere between 3 and 12 piglets, and they can reproduce as many as 3 times in 15 months. They're a generalist species. They'll eat just about anything. They have an acute sense of smell that aids in their search for food, and they live almost anywhere. So they're a very adaptable and very intelligent animal. Males can weigh up to about 200 kilograms and sows up to about 170. Their length is about 1.8 meters with a maximum height at the shoulder of about 1 meter. They have continually growing canine teeth or tusks, 2 in each jaw. The young are frequently, as you see on the screen here, reddish brown with black longitudinal stripes that gradually disappear as they grow. And their maximum lifespan is about 25 years. Where they like to live, they prefer dense brush associated with riverbeds or swampy areas for cover, shelter, and farrowing. They'll commonly use conifer and hardwood forests for feeding and for travel corridors. They tend to live in remote areas or where human activity is minimal, and they can be found in fields or grassy areas. Due to their inability to sweat for thermoregulation, they will often be attracted to ponds, streams, and dugouts in order to cool down, and they're most active during the evening and early morning. So some of their impacts on the landscape, they can damage both natural and agricultural resources. They feed primarily by rooting and grazing, and this feeding behavior can result in decreased water quality, increased presence of non-native plant species, as well as increased soil erosion, modification of nutrient cycles, damage to native plant species and crops, as well as negative impacts to other wild animals, either directly through predation or indirectly through competition. And this can be particularly devastating to species at risk. They're also known to carry a variety of different diseases and parasites that can impact the health of people, livestock, and wildlife. And some examples of those include brucellosis, leptospirosis, salmonellosis, toxoplasmosis, pseudorabies, and sarcoptic mange. A little bit about how to spot the presence of invasive swine on the landscape. You might see evidence of rooting or grazing activities. You might see some wallowing that has occurred in wetter areas. You may see their tracks or droppings. You might hear the sound of pigs grunting, or you might come across some images on trail cameras. One thing about their tracks, they're quite often confused with white-tailed deer tracks. It can be really difficult to distinguish the two when you see them on the ground. However, deer tracks tend to be more heart-shaped than swine, and when the dew claws are visible, they're usually in line with the hoof print. Wild boar tracks tend to be a little more round, and when the dew claws are visible, they usually appear more off to the side of the hoof print. And you'll often see that sounders will frequently use the same trails repeatedly to travel back and forth between their bedding and feeding areas. So you can see that on the screen there in that middle photograph. So why is there now this increased interest in eradication of invasive swine? From our perspective in the wildlife branch, we've always wanted them eradicated because of their damaging impacts to the habitat of native wildlife. But there seems to be an increased interest more recently, and some of this is due to the results of a study that was published just in 2019. And you can see some maps that came from that study that were generated, and they show the range expansion of invasive swine in Canada from 1990 through to 2017. So many states and provinces are struggling with the negative consequences of invasive swine, and we're no different than that. Many of them, and ourselves included, are starting to ramp up efforts to eradicate the problem before it becomes worse. So you can see how it's increased over time, and we sure don't want to see it increasing additionally. The presence of African swine fever has also raised the profile of these animals. So ASF, as it's known, is a growing concern across the globe, and free-ranging pigs are an issue. And this is because ASF is caused by a very contagious virus, and it's resulting in the killing of pigs and wild boar in Africa, Asia, and parts of Europe. So the presence of ASF is shown here on the map. Should ASF be introduced to Manitoba, it's not here presently, but if it did become present in Manitoba, it could potentially decimate our province's multi-billion-dollar hog industry. People can't be infected with ASF, but they are the most likely source of introducing it into Canada, and that can be done through contaminated meat products or through clothing and footwear that's carrying the virus. It's very hardy, and it can persist for a long time in the environment, in carcasses and in a variety of different pork products. So the map on the right shows the global ASF outbreaks from 2015 to 2020. Light blue indicates the presence in domestic pigs, medium blue in wild boar, free-roaming wild boar, and the dark blue in both the domestic and free-roaming populations. So you can see how invasive swine are clearly a big issue. So if you're interested in learning more about African swine fever, there's a lot of really good information about it available online. A couple reputable sites are provided here on the slide. One is the Canadian Pork Council. Another is our department's website, Agriculture and Resource Development. And the fact sheets that's shown on the slide is available on both of those sites. So how invasive swine are being currently managed in the province? Back in the 1990s, our branch recognized the threat posed by these critters. And at that time, they were listed as restricted exotic species under the Wildlife Act. And that meant that unless a permit was obtained from the minister, no one could possess them, import them into the province, or allow them to be released or escape into the wild. So any escapees were required to be captured or dispatched as soon as possible. And then in 2001, the province was declared a wild boar control area under the Wildlife Act. And this meant that any resident of Manitoba could hunt wild boar without a permit or license at any time of the year with very few restrictions. And this declaration currently remains in effect. So that's still an option for folks. However, recent research has now shown that hunting wild boar actually increases the problem that we once hoped to solve. So because of this, it's no longer supported as an effective management technique. And why is that? This is because because of their reproductive efficiency and their movement behavior, they really can't be effectively controlled through the use of firearms. Hunting pressure that fails to eliminate all the animals in a family group or sounder can result in further dispersion of the animals, so leading to more problems in new areas. And feral swine that have been hunted learn behaviors to avoid hunting pressure, which makes them even harder to eradicate. So because of all this, Manitoba is now considering a shift in how invasive swine are managed in the province. Provincial staff sit on a number of different working groups that share information and best management practices for invasive swine. And these BMPs are helping to guide the development of a new management approach in the province. So potentially this could include a new definition of invasive swine, something along the lines of a pig, boar, or swine that appears to be untamed, undomesticated, or in a wild state, outside of a containment facility, or appears to be contained for commercial hunting or trapping. And a population management program that targets eradication of invasive swine has been proposed to government. Elements include landscape monitoring, removal of invasive swine that are present on the landscape, some disease monitoring, and public education. If it gets approved for funding, a program coordinator would be hired to oversee the delivery and would seek out partnership opportunities to boost the efforts for monitoring, removal, and public education. So this leads us to opportunities for watershed districts such as yours to be able to help out and assist with invasive swine control efforts. So some potential opportunities to consider, some monitoring and reporting, because watershed districts are so widespread on the landscape. They're out there actively engaging with landowners and visiting landowners' sites. They have an opportunity to spread the word through public education and to note any signs of potential invasive swine activities on the landscape. Possibility for connections, so connecting landowners who are experiencing damages from invasive swine, connecting them with information about where to report that, what type of activities they can undertake to help with removal efforts. So lots of opportunities there for things that the Watershed District can consider in ways to help out. In terms of public messaging, Manitoba is looking at potentially piggybacking, pardon the pun, on the messaging from the USA's Squeal on Pigs campaign. Other provinces are also considering adopting this messaging, and the Alberta Invasive Species Council has already adopted the campaign. So this may be something that you see taking root all across Canada. And then since we're chatting today, some other opportunities that the Watershed District should be aware of for how we can kind of collaborate and help people coexist with wildlife on the landscape. The province does have a Wildlife Smart program. And basically this helps to educate people about why there are conflicts between people and wildlife, what actions people can undertake to reduce their risk of conflict with wildlife, and also understanding how to respond appropriately in encounters with wildlife. And so information about that Wildlife Smart program is available online at the URL that's listed on the screen there. And the information that's included on our website, there's a number of different tools that include posters, fact sheets, other publications, helpful links, and we do add more materials regularly. So something to be aware of if you're looking for tools for public education messaging in your area. We do have the invasive swine fact sheet that is available on that website. Something that you can quite easily print out if you're looking to provide that to any livestock or agricultural producers in your area. And if you're looking to report any signs of invasive swine presence in your watershed district, that can be done by contacting your local conservation officer, or by phoning the number there on the screen, or to emailing reports to a biologist at wildlife@gov.mb.ca. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. If hopefully anyone has any questions for Brian or myself.
Sounds good. Brian, did you have anything to add to that?
ASF, Janine covered nicely, but it is a growing concern, and I think many of the producers in your area will be concerned about it, and we'll have been hearing some stories about it. The main gist of why we wanted to attend today was to raise awareness with respect to wild boar are on the landscape. Wild boar, not everyone recognizes they are a problem. And we need to have more people understand that they are a problem, a growing problem, an issue that needs to be addressed. And I don't want to sound like the Chicken Little, the sky is falling kind of thing, but there's been a lot of talk about wild boar in various stages across the province. Janine talked about the history dating back to the 1990s, but we wanted to present today to help raise awareness that they are an issue, so that people don't turn their back on them when they see them and just go, oh, it's just a free-ranging pig, don't worry about it, because it can grow to something far more pressing and far greater problem for each watershed and the landowners on the landscape. So we thanks for the opportunity to provide the information and hopefully grow some awareness with respect to what the issue is and what the potential solutions are.
What are the control methods that are recommended so far? What's the top way of controlling it?
Right. So what most jurisdictions are finding to be most effective is something called corral trapping. And basically that's like a large circular trap with a trap door that usually drops down. It can be activated remotely so that once you like pre-bait, get the pigs adjusted to coming into the corral trap, you can lower the gate once the entire group is inside the trap. And that way you're removing an entire group at one time instead of one or two individuals out of a group of 20 pigs and then dispersing the rest and causing problems elsewhere.
Yeah. Sounds like the old days of trapping elk when they were moving around the province. Yeah. Except you can do it remote now. You don't have to be out there.
Yeah, no, they're gone. And to build on what Janine's earlier point about hunting, that's the other concern we have. We're aware that there's a lot of hunters out there that enjoy the opportunity to chase these things because there is no season on them, right? If once deer season closes, somebody continues to want to be on the landscape for recreational hunting opportunities. Some switch to coyote hunting in the fall. Some switch to chasing wild boar around. And we recognize the desire of the hunters in the province to participate in harvesting these animals because I understand the meat is good for sure, and highly sought after. The issue that Janine touched upon is extensive hunting turns them nocturnal. Any of you on the call who hunt whitetail deer know what a highly pressured whitetail deer buck's like. Well, that's what these things, they turn nocturnal, they get harder and harder to hunt, they disperse, and they're harder and harder to control. So as much as we appreciate hunters and their attempts to reduce the numbers in a local area, it's not an activity that can be supported.
Yeah. Having said that, I guess if a hunter wanted to do it, you'd go after the solitary boar rather than the sounder group would probably be the most effective.
It would be the most, yeah, for sure. It would be the most effective. And we're not telling people if you're, working on your tractor or you're out in your yard and you see a wild boar in your backyard, not to take the gun and put it down if you can. I mean, clearly that's take advantage of your opportunity. It's just, we don't want to encourage a culture of pig hunting.
Yeah.
Is the easiest way to say it.
Because I think in this area, as far as I know, it's just been solitary boars that have been observed or, crossing a field or whatever so far. But doesn't mean they're not in the area.
Yeah, and it would be good for us to know, like when people are seeing those solitary boar, if we can get those reports coming in. Some parts of the province we've received numerous reports from, so we're well aware that there's quite a presence there, but other parts of the province we receive few to no reports, and so we're not sure if that's because there's no boar there or people are just used to seeing them, or people maybe aren't even aware of their presence, and are maybe not seeing the difference between the deer tracks and the wild boar tracks. But if we can get them looking for signs of rooting behavior or wallowing behavior, then that's just elevates people's awareness of what to look for.
And that's a good, to build off Janine's point real quick there. Technically, you're supposed to report any harvesting of a wild boar. We know that's not occurring, but from a watershed standpoint, all the folks on this call, you may have various levels of understanding or knowledge about pigs in your watershed, but encouraging people to report would be helpful to the watershed, in my opinion. Because you don't know what your problem is right now either, unless people are reporting it.
I think the trapping will be a shortfall of the increase with the litters every year. Like, you're never going to trap as many as a newborn every year.
Okay, if the trapping is done correctly, and Janine talked about it, and Janine did describe a Cadillac version of the trap, which is the ideal scenario where you have a large corral trap that's pre-baited, that has a remotely detonated or remotely triggered gate, so that you can actually monitor how many pigs are using it, and you don't trap when the first 2 animals go in, but you wait for all 16 of them to go in. And I'm just using hypothetical numbers here, but ideally, if you wait and you get the entire sounder, you're removing that entire breeding population, that small breeding population. So it can be effective. And it is the approach that's being promoted across North America as the right way to attempt to remove permanently pigs from the landscape. It is labor intensive. It is not free. You have to set up the traps, you have to pre-bait. It does require manpower. You don't have to use the cameras, but that is the best way to ensure you're getting the entire sounder. What am I missing, Janine?
It has been done successfully in other jurisdictions to eradicate, particularly, small to modest sized populations. And you kind of, move from area to area, eliminating those small family groups from a particular area before moving on to the next area and doing the same thing. So it has been done successfully in other areas. So we hope to duplicate the same success story.
Yeah, it sounds like the best solution for a bad problem, but maybe not the ultimate, but
Well, you're not gonna get 100%.
no.
You know, but it's a
Yeah,
good.
I think that comment is very valid. It's going to be very difficult to get 100%. But we've got to strive to try to get 100%. And again, your watershed may be one that you don't have a lot of pigs in, but maybe your watershed would be one where you could start and you take from that and you work your way across the province in a trapping effort with cooperators such as watersheds to try to monitor these traps and successfully take these things out. Will there always be one or two? Potentially, but Janine brings up a good point. I believe it was Montana that successfully, they identified pigs right on the border and they have thrown a lot of time and energy into it and they've declared themselves boar free.
Okay.
Again, those folks were on the front. They were a great example because they were earlier, they were in the infancy stage of understanding pigs, but they learned from other jurisdictions. The best example is Texas. Texas is suffering immensely from pigs. Texas spends hundreds of thousands of dollars air gunning pigs. They put helicopters in the air, night vision scopes, the whole 9 yards trying to do that. We're trying to avoid getting we will never get there in Manitoba because politically it'll just never be acceptable. But the state that we're referring to is aware of the problem and addressed the problem early on. Manitoba's probably past that point, but we still believe we could address this if we put enough resources into it and have enough people on landscape interested in helping with the issue.
Yeah, I noticed one of your pictures there, you had wildlife federations involved. I think it was Cypress River. But,
Correct.
are you getting good cooperation with wildlife organizations?
Cypress River is the poster child right now, but there's potentially others that we could get involved as well. Janine, is there others that you've been working with?
Not so far, but yeah, we hope to expand efforts if our proposal goes forward, gets approval to go forward.
Yeah, that'd be a logical group to get some manpower to support the program for sure.
And thank you for that. It does lead to one other question or one other comment where you folks could be incredibly helpful, and that's the landowner contacts. Who knows where there's pigs? Who's a cooperative landowner that can work with? Again, if there's a landowner who loves letting people run on his land to hunt pigs, that's not the best place to trap pigs. But if that landowner can pull back on the permission to hunt pigs and give approval to a group just to trap pigs, that would be a step in the right direction. So again, your knowledge of the landowners and your connections with the landowners in your watershed would be very advantageous.
No, that's great. No, thank you for this. It was very interesting for this. So I thank you for coming, and unless there's another thing, we'll carry on this meeting. And but thank you, both of you, for making us aware of all this.